The Galactic Senate had always assumed humanity was an anomaly, an unruly species that had somehow survived despite its primitive tendencies. Their military analysts dismissed Earth's defensive forces as crude, their technology as inefficient, and their strategies as reckless. The Senate's elite forces had fought wars for millennia, perfecting the art of battle with precision. Yet, when conflict finally reached Earth, something unthinkable happened. It wasn't the human military that terrified them. It was the civilians. The first reports were brushed off as errors in data transmission. Kill counts didn't make sense. Entire squads of elite warriors trained since birth, genetically enhanced, equipped with the finest weapons in the galaxy, were being wiped out in numbers that should have been impossible. Senate forces had engaged civilian populations before, and the results were always the same: panic, surrender, helplessness. But Earth's civilians, they didn't run. They adapted. They fought. And somehow, against all odds, they won. It started in the outer colonies. The Senate's fleets had blockaded major cities, expecting swift capitulation. Instead, they encountered a level of resistance that no intelligence report had predicted. The first recorded encounter came from an assault on what their analysts had classified as an unarmed urban zone. Their forces landed, expecting a routine occupation. What they got was chaos, the kind of chaos only humans could turn into an advantage. Security drones sent back footage that baffled military tacticians. Earth's civilians weren't just resisting, they were counterattacking with an efficiency that defied logic. A simple shopkeeper had taken down a squad of highly trained enforcers using nothing but improvised traps. A group of university students had rerouted enemy communications, feeding misinformation so convincingly that the invaders ended up fighting each other. An old engineer, well past his prime, had converted an outdated power grid into an electromagnetic weapon, frying entire platoons before they realized what hit them. These weren't soldiers. These were ordinary people, teachers, mechanics, drivers, programmers, outperforming the most elite warriors the galaxy had ever seen. The Senate scrambled for an explanation. Surely, this was an anomaly. A rare instance of luck, perhaps. But as more reports flooded in, the pattern became undeniable. Every attempt to establish control over human populations was met with resistance far beyond what any logical assessment could justify. Where other species relied on centralized leadership, humans operated in decentralized networks. When one stronghold fell, the knowledge of its failures spread instantly, preventing the same mistake from being made twice. They weren't just fighting back, they were evolving mid-battle. By the time the Senate understood the severity of the situation, it was too late. They had underestimated the sheer depth of human adaptability. In one region, a group of farmers had used agricultural drones to deliver precision strikes. In another, a retired historian led a campaign using ancient battle tactics the Senate had long forgotten. What they had failed to consider was that humanity had spent its entire history mastering the art of survival. It wasn't about superior weapons or elite training, it was about an instinct honed through generations of hardship. As the conflict escalated, the Senate's desperation grew. Their commanders, once confident in a swift victory, were now reluctant to engage at all. No matter how many resources they poured into the invasion, their kill counts remained staggeringly low, while humanity's only continued to rise. Worst of all, there was no pattern to predict who the next threat would be. A schoolteacher might outmaneuver an entire squadron. A teenager with no formal combat training might develop a countermeasure against advanced energy weapons. There was no telling where the next devastating blow would come from. Then, the Senate made their biggest mistake. They assumed that by pulling back, by regrouping, by reassessing their approach, they could regain control of the situation. But humans didn't just survive war. They learned from it. And in that moment of hesitation, humanity did something the Senate never expected. They went on the offensive. The first sign of retaliation came from orbit, where Senate warships reported system failures across multiple fleets. At first, it was dismissed as sabotage until they realized the attacks weren't coming from the military. A collective of civilian engineers, hackers, and scientists had infiltrated their systems, exploiting vulnerabilities that the Senate's most brilliant minds had never considered. Their ships weren't just disabled, they were turned against them. And then, silence. A chilling silence across Senate-controlled space as entire fleets vanished from communications. No one knew how it was happening. No one understood the full scope of the disaster. But one thing became clear: this was no longer a war. This was a reckoning. And the Senate, for the first time in its history, felt fear. Because they had thought humanity's greatest strength was its armies. They had thought its deadliest warriors were its soldiers. But now they understood the truth. It had always been the civilians. Panic spread through the Galactic Senate like wildfire. For the first time in recorded history, an invasion force had been turned back not by superior firepower or strategy, but by sheer unpredictability. Every assumption they had made about humanity had been proven wrong. They had seen humans as chaotic, irrational, and inferior. But now, as fleets went dark and entire planets fell out of their control, the Senate was forced to confront a terrifying truth. They hadn't underestimated humanity's military. They had misunderstood what humanity was. The elite strategists of the Senate had spent decades studying war, perfecting doctrines based on rigid structures and predictive models. They believed that superior discipline always triumphed, that overwhelming firepower always secured victory, that the best-trained soldiers were always the deadliest force on the battlefield. But what they faced on Earth wasn't a structured army. It was something far worse, something that didn't follow patterns, that didn't break when pressured, that didn't surrender when it should. They had come expecting an easy campaign, expecting to crush resistance and install their rule within days. Instead, they found themselves entangled in an invisible war. Senate forces couldn't secure a foothold because humans didn't fight in ways that made sense. They didn't rely on centralized leadership, so decapitating command structures did nothing. They didn't fight along predictable battle lines, so standard military maneuvers failed. And worst of all, every loss the humans suffered only made them deadlier. Each encounter was a lesson. Each defeat refined their tactics. They weren't fighting a conventional war. They were evolving in real time. The breaking point came when a Senate flagship, the Vatheron, vanished from orbit. It wasn't destroyed in battle, nor was it lost to sabotage. It was simply gone. The Senate's greatest warship, bristling with weaponry, shielded by technology generations ahead of anything humanity possessed, had disappeared without a trace. Hours later, a transmission was received. The image was grainy, distorted, as if it had been patched together from scavenged signals. A human stood at the center of the feed, their face partially obscured by flickering light. The uniform they wore wasn't military. It was patched together from different fabrics, pieces of equipment from various sources. A civilian. And yet, the way they spoke carried the weight of something far more dangerous than an admiral issuing orders. "You took our world," the voice said, calm, deliberate. "So we took your ship. You think you understand us. You think this war makes sense. But you don't even know what you're fighting." The transmission cut out, leaving only silence. And then reports flooded in ships refusing to respond to Senate commands, supply routes collapsing, outposts going dark without a single distress signal. No massive battles. No grand offensives. Just a slow, methodical disassembly of their war machine. Desperation took hold. The Senate scrambled to uncover the source of this growing chaos. Surely, there was a hidden military force behind this. A rogue faction, a secret human war council directing the resistance from the shadows. But there was nothing. No single leader. No headquarters. No master plan. Just scattered groups of civilians, each acting independently, each finding their own way to fight. That was the moment they realized the true nature of their mistake. The Senate had always believed that war was fought by soldiers, by armies, by generals issuing commands from secure bunkers. But on Earth, war was something different. It was in the streets, in the homes, in the hands of every citizen. Every human was a potential threat. Every city was a battlefield. Every setback they suffered became a lesson learned. And then, the betrayal. One of the Senate's own, high strategist Veln, defected. He had been one of the invasion's chief architects, the mastermind behind the campaign to subjugate Earth. But after witnessing firsthand what the humans were capable of, he made a decision that shook the Senate to its core. He abandoned his post, hijacked a command vessel, and vanished into human-controlled space. His final transmission was damning. You never understood what you were dealing with. You assumed superiority would guarantee victory. But humans, they don't fight wars the way we do. They don't break the way we expect them to. I will not be part of this slaughter. Not because I pity them, but because I fear them. And soon, so will you. The Senate was left reeling. A high strategist, a mind that had crafted countless victories across the galaxy, had not only admitted defeat, but had sided with the enemy. It was unthinkable. And then came the final, chilling realization. The humans weren't just winning. They were taking the fight beyond Earth. Senate forces reported sudden, inexplicable uprisings on distant worlds. Colonies under firm Senate-controlled planets that had never shown signs of rebellion were now resisting. Infrastructure was failing. Strategic outposts were being dismantled. And the worst part? None of it pointed back to Earth's military. It was the civilians. Again, the ones who had escaped the occupation. The ones who had seen their cities fall and their people taken. They weren't just fighting back on Earth. They were spreading, teaching others, adapting again. And now, the war was no longer contained to one planet. It had gone viral. The Senate's worst nightmare had come true. Because when they had attacked Earth, they had expected a war against an army. Instead, they had started a war against an entire species. And humanity was just getting started. The Galactic Senate had always believed war was a science, a formula of logistics, strategy, and controlled force. They had studied thousands of species, conquered countless worlds, and refined the art of domination into something predictable. But against humanity, their equations had failed. The moment their fleets touched Earth, they had entered a battlefield that wasn't ruled by rules. And now, as their grip on the war weakened, they realized they weren't just losing territory. They were losing control of the future itself. Deep within the core systems of the Senate's empire, the fractures were spreading. Alien warlords, once loyal to the Great Coalition, whispered doubts behind closed doors. The unthinkable was happening. Humanity's defiance was inspiring others. Species that had lived under Senate rule for generations were beginning to question their place in the hierarchy. If a single planet, a species dismissed as a backwater anomaly, could stand against the might of the Senate, what did that say about the balance of power? What if the Senate wasn't invincible? The Senate tried to silence the murmurs with strength. But the problem wasn't military. It was psychological. Fear was creeping into their ranks, and with fear came hesitation. And hesitation was fatal. On Earth, the resistance was no longer just surviving. It was expanding. What had begun as scattered defiance had coalesced into something greater: an underground network, a decentralized intelligence web where every civilian, every technician, every strategist was contributing to the war effort. It wasn't a government, wasn't an army, wasn't an organization in any conventional sense. It was something else entirely. It was humanity at its purest, resourceful, relentless, unpredictable. Across war zones, Senate forces found themselves fighting ghosts. Their supply lines were collapsing, their command chains disrupted. A single senator demanded to know why a military force that had crushed entire star systems was struggling to hold a single world. The answer he received was chilling. The humans are not fighting for control. They are fighting for chaos. And chaos cannot be contained. Even their most elite warlords were faltering. Commander Ithran, one of the most feared tacticians in Senate history, had led the subjugation of over 30 worlds. He had never lost a battle, never even considered the possibility. But now, trapped in the ruins of what should have been a secure outpost, he was beginning to understand what made humans different. They didn't just resist. They adapted faster than he could. The very streets he had taken hours ago were now death traps. His forces, trained in centuries-old doctrines, had been rendered obsolete in days. And worst of all, there was no leader he could outmaneuver. No grand army he could face in the open. There was just a constant shifting battlefield where every human was a soldier, a saboteur, a tactician in their own right. But the Senate still had one final play, a weapon locked away in the archives of their most secretive research divisions. Not a fleet, not a superweapon, but something older. A lost technology from the days before the Senate's rise, before the galaxy had been tamed. Something they had deemed too dangerous to use, too unpredictable even for their conquests. But now, with their empire on the brink, they were willing to risk everything. Deep beneath the surface of a dead world, a research station came alive. Hidden beneath layers of rock and secrecy, it had been forgotten by all but the highest-ranking members of the Senate. There, in the silence of the void, a signal was sent. A beacon. A call to something buried, something that had once been banished from history itself. And as the transmission pulsed through the blackness of space, something answered. Back on Earth, humanity was pushing forward, striking deeper into enemy territory, taking the fight beyond the planet's atmosphere. And yet, beneath their victories, there was unease. Something was shifting. The war was changing. The Senate wasn't just retreating. They were waiting, watching, preparing for something. And then, the first anomaly appeared. A Senate battleship, long presumed lost, re-emerged on the edges of the conflict. But something was wrong. It didn't respond to hails. Its energy signature was distorted. And as human forces moved to intercept, the truth became terrifyingly clear. The Senate had activated something beyond war, beyond strategy, beyond reason itself. The Senate battleship drifted in silence, an ominous shadow against the stars. No distress calls, no life signs, just a lingering signal pulsing from its core. When the first human recon team approached, their systems flickered, HUDs glitched, sensors scrambled, even their comms filled with distorted whispers. The closer they got, the worse it became. Then, without warning, the ship came alive. Weapons systems flared to life, targeting systems locked onto the human fleet. But the strangest part? There were no crew aboard. Across the warfront, the reports spread. Other long-lost Senate vessels were reappearing, each one broadcasting the same eerie signal. It didn't take long for analysts to put the pieces together. The Senate wasn't just throwing their remaining fleets into the fight. They had activated something ancient, something that even they had feared. And now, whatever it was spreading. Humanity's alliance, an uneasy coalition of resistance fighters, defected alien factions, and rogue AI constructs, was already strained. They had been winning not through brute force, but by turning the Senate's own rigidity against them, forcing them into battles they didn't know how to fight. But this was different. It wasn't a doctrine or a fleet. It was something unknown. And unknowns were dangerous. Tensions flared. Some in the alliance wanted to pull back, regroup, study the anomaly before engaging. Others argued that hesitation would cost them everything. Then came the first real blow. A human strike team, one of the best, vanished mid-mission. No alarms, no final transmissions, just silence. Hours later, their ship returned on autopilot, docking with a resistance station. The moment it breached the hangar bay, power across the station cut out. Lights flickered. Doors locked. And the screaming began. Survivors, if they could be called, that were found wandering the corridors. Eyes empty, movements stiff, voices repeating fragmented words that made no sense. It was as if something had rewritten them, hollowed them out from the inside. Whatever the Senate had unleashed, it wasn't just a weapon. It was a corruption, a living, thinking force. And it had already begun to infect the battlefield. Panic threatened to break the alliance apart. If the anomaly could take their best soldiers and twist them into something unrecognizable, what chance did they have? But among the chaos, one voice cut through the noise. A lone strategist, a former civilian who had risen to prominence not by rank, but by sheer necessity. They spoke not of retreat, not of fear, but of adaptation. The Senate had turned to something outside their understanding, something beyond their control. And that meant one thing: they were desperate. This was not a calculated move. It was a last resort. And that meant it could be broken. A plan was forged, reckless and impossible. Humanity had always fought best when the odds were against them. If this anomaly was rewriting everything it touched, then they had to get ahead of it. Learn its rules before it learned theirs. But to do that, someone had to go into the heart of the storm. Into the drifting battleship. Into the unknown. A team was chosen. Not the most elite soldiers, not this time. Those with the sharpest minds, the ones who could improvise under pressure, who could look at the impossible and find a way through. The mission was simple: board the ghost ship, retrieve any data on what the Senate had awakened, and get out before it consumed them too. But as they approached, the signal changed. No longer just distorted whispers. Now it spoke. It knew their names. It had been waiting. The voices from the battleship weren't just speaking, they were waiting, calling each team member by name, whispering things they shouldn't know. Childhood memories, old fears, things buried so deep they had no place in this war. The team leader signaled for a retreat, but it was already too late. The air around them felt heavier, the ship itself shifting as if it had been expecting them. Then the doors sealed. Across the warfront, humanity's forces were preparing for the inevitable. The anomaly wasn't spreading at random. It had a purpose, a direction. It wasn't just hunting, it was searching. And when the signals began to change, when the corrupted Senate vessels suddenly shifted course and moved in perfect synchronization, the horrifying realization set in. They weren't the primary target. The anomaly was looking for something else. Something buried deeper than Earth's war effort. Something that had remained hidden even from history itself. The command network went silent for exactly 7 seconds. When it returned, an encrypted message had forced its way into every human system, overriding protocols that shouldn't have been possible to crack. No known language, no traceable origin. But when the code was deciphered, one phrase stood out: "We are returning." At first, no one knew what it meant. An intercepted Senate transmission confirmed they didn't either. The anomaly wasn't just an old weapon, it was looking for something lost. Something that had disappeared long before humanity had even reached the stars. And then, like an old wound splitting open, long-forgotten signals began to resurface from the outer rim. Ships of human design older than Earth's modern fleets, predating even the first colonial expeditions, were reactivating. They had been waiting, buried beneath dead moons and drifting in black space, systems long dormant. Now, something had woken them up. On the ghost ship, the infiltration team fought to find answers. The deeper they pushed, the worse the voices became. Not just whispers now, but a force clawing at their thoughts, pulling memories out and twisting them, showing things that couldn't be real. One of them swore they saw their own reflection moving out of sync. Another was certain they heard their own voice laughing behind them when no one had spoken. And then they found it, the ship's core, where the anomaly had taken root. A mass of shifting energy, something neither organic nor technological, something alive. And in that moment, as it finally acknowledged their presence, every ship in the fleet received a single, undeniable transmission. It wasn't the Senate's creation. It wasn't their weapon. It was human. A forgotten project. A war before recorded history. A desperate gambit lost to time. Whatever the Senate had awakened, whatever had been buried beneath their empire, it had always belonged to Earth. And now it was coming home. The message was clear. The war wasn't just about survival anymore. It never had been. Humanity wasn't fighting to escape extinction. They were fighting to reclaim something stolen. And the enemy, both old and new, had no idea what they had just unleashed. The anomaly-driven fleet, once a fragmented force of derelict vessels and corrupted systems, now moved with terrifying unity. Where the Senate had been rigid, predictable, bound by doctrine, this force was something else: adaptive, insatiable, a consuming storm that reshaped everything in its path. And at the heart of it all, the ghost signal pulsed, spreading like wildfire across the battlefield, rewriting ships, rewriting minds. But humanity had seen this before, seen enemies stronger, faster, more advanced, and still found a way to break them. They had no empire to lose, no homeworld they could afford to retreat to. They had only the fight, and they fought best when the odds were impossible. Commanders shouted orders, but the battle was beyond coordination now. Fighters wove through the wreckage, dropping decoys, scrambling enemy sensors with on-the-fly frequency shifts. Capital ships burned their own reactors to boost kinetic rounds past light speed, turning dead hulks into hypervelocity weapons. AI-driven drones clashed in microsecond duels, rewriting themselves mid-engagement to outmaneuver the enemy's relentless algorithms. And still, at the center of it all, the infiltration team fought their own battle deep inside the anomaly's core vessel. The air shimmered, thick with distortion. Every step forward felt like moving through water, every thought pulling them in two directions at once. The entity wasn't attacking, it was learning, reshaping itself, pulling from their own instincts, their own survival-driven creativity. It wasn't just an enemy. It was trying to become them. The lead operative reached the core. It wasn't a control center, not in any way they understood. It was something deeper, something ancient, a fractured memory from a war lost to time. And now, as it awakened, it had to choose destroy, consume, or something else. Outside, the battle was shifting. Human forces were losing ground, but something was changing in the anomaly's pattern. Its tactics weren't as erratic, weren't as overwhelming. It was hesitating. Then the command network lit up with a single, impossible transmission. System override root command confirmed. Executing final protocol. A human voice. Not from the fleet. Not from the present. A voice from the past, embedded in the anomaly's core like a scar waiting to be opened. And as it spoke, the entire enemy force froze. The battlefield went silent. One by one, the corrupted ships powered down. The massive, shifting fleet that had been poised to consume the galaxy simply stopped. The signal, the whispers, the rewriting of reality itself gone. The anomaly had shut itself down. But then, as the surviving human fleet processed what had happened, the real message came through. Not from the anomaly. Not from the Senate. From beyond the galactic rim. A second fleet. A second force. One that had been waiting. Watching. And now, after eons of silence, it was on its way. Humanity had won the battle. But the war?